Hey everyone, today I'm going to be talking to you about writing your own cadenza for the bassoon concertos of the classical music period. Now obviously for most bassoonists out there, this information will be most pertinent to them when tackling the Mozart Bassoon Concerto K191, but as we will see, there are far more opportunities out there than we might think to perform a cadenza. In this video, we're going to look at some key first-hand accounts talking about the best practices when composing your own, as well as talk about some extant cadenzas by an eminent bassoonist of the time, Etienne OZ, and see how he breaks the rules we follow today. So, are you ready for this? Before we begin, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Thank you very much for that. Many movements within solo concertos of the late 18th and early 19th centuries conclude with moments where the soloist is allowed the opportunity to perform an improvised virtuosic flourish, what we call a cadenza. While it is likely that the absolute top players of the period could truly improvise a tasteful and moving cadenza, the sources we have from the time acknowledge the difficulty in this practice. In general, primary sources agree on the following broad points with regard to cadenzas. A cadenza is meant to feel metrically free, or at least with the sort of metrical flexibility which projects an air of extemporaneous creation. That it is better to have a shorter cadenza than one which is too long. A cadenza's musical content should be creative or inventive. The feeling, affect, or atmosphere of the cadenza should be the same or similar to that of the movement it is concluding. More than one cadenza in a piece or movement is pushing it. And finally, mastering the art of writing and performing cadenzas is hard. Now, it's clear from any source which speaks about the practice of cadenzas that each author has clearly witnessed performers making a hatchet job in a cadenza, either by the author's own judgment or from their observations of the audience. The most commonly found criticisms of a bad cadenza are that they are too long, or that they are too different in affect from the movement that they are concluding. In his Practical Reflections on the Figurative Art of Singing of 1774, Battista Mancini gives us hints that the cadenza should be executed in one breath. The art of sustaining and controlling and graduating the breath so as to be able to give the right proportion to the cadenza from beginning to the end without interruption is the principal and most important acquisition for a student. Common sense guides the singer to undertake those things only which lie within his ability. Thus he avoids exhaustion and the chagrin that he would feel if he were not able to perform the trill perfectly and reach the final note. Another important point from this chapter is that the performer must choose the leading movement from the ritornello of the song and by his own invention develop on it all the required virtuosity that forms a well-balanced cadenza. So some sort of incorporation of pre-existing melodic material should be present and then built upon. Finally, Mancini says, a cadenza is a necessity at the end of any well-written song. This is an interesting point. Should we then be allowing ourselves to add cadenzas where not specifically indicated? Well, even if the song is a masterpiece, it will be languishing and unfinished without one. Now, Joachim Quantz, whose 1752 treatise on playing the flute, has quite a bit of information for us wind players. Pretty much right away, he gives us an opinion which conflicts with that last point of Mancini's. He says, the abuse of cadenzas is apparent, if in instrumental music they are introduced in pieces in which they are not at all suitable, for example, in gay and quick pieces in 2/4, 3/4, 3/8, 12/8, and 6/8 time. They are permissible only in pathetic and slow pieces or in serious quick ones. It's worth keeping in mind that Quantz is drawing on experiences from a generation or even 2 generations before Mancini. By the time Mancini writes his singing treatise, many of the instrumental forms Quantz says one shouldn't append a cadenza to had fallen out of fashion. Quantz is also in agreement with Mancini about including material from the composition, writing, "Cadenzas must stem from the principal sentiment of the piece and include a short repetition or imitation of the most pleasing phrases contained in it." Curiously, he then qualifies his point by saying that using material from the composition is the most expedient way of going about preparing a cadenza. In this manner, you not only can make up for any lack of inventiveness, but can always confirm the prevailing passion of the piece as well. This is an advantage that is not too well known, which I would like to recommend to everyone. That last sentence is Quantz pointing to the fact that many of his contemporaries are not using material from the composition in their cadenzas. Finally, Quantz directly states that vocal cadenzas or cadenzas for a wind instrument must be so constituted that they can be performed in one breath. The chapter on cadenzas in Quantz's book is extremely useful for those wishing to know more compositional details. He tells you which keys you can travel to and how to get there, as well as provide a few examples of his own invention. While it's clear to someone who is familiar with the musical styles of the 18th century that these examples are a little dated when it comes to the bassoon concertos of the classical period, it's worth keeping in mind that when we approach music from the past with an eye to historical performance, we have to recognize that there are a range of possibilities in aesthetic. Think of it this way. Mozart's Bassoon Concerto K191 was written when the composer was 18 years old. But how old was the bassoonist or the bassoonists who would have performed it? Likely they would have been older than the young Mozart and may have formed their musical tastes in an earlier aesthetic. Maybe they would have been influenced by Quantz's generation. It is also possible, however, that a younger bassoonist around the age of Mozart could have had the chance to perform that concerto during their lifetime. But how would that younger player approach the cadenza? Well, lucky for us, Etienne, only 2 years older than Mozart, leaves us 13 cadenzas in his new method for bassoon of 1803. Hidden in the 42 caprices at the back of the treatise, Ozzy includes cadenzas in 13 keys. Ozzy's cadenzas all follow a basic formal structure. They begin with a motive in a slower tempo or in larger note values, which is then imitated, usually only twice. This is then followed by a faster section, usually indicated as such, as well as being written in faster note values. Sometimes in between these two sections, a bridge is inserted, which Ozzy indicates to fluidly accelerate to the new tempo. The faster section has an imitative structure, either melodic or harmonic, and then leads to the cadential trill through a sort of unstable melodic progression. Let's look at Caprice number 19 as an example. In the first 2 bars, we see that imitative section. In the 3rd and 4th bar, we have another imitation under which Ozzy writes serré, which directly translates to tight, but here means an acceleration. From the 5th bar, we see the indication for allegro, as well as a change to a smaller note value. The 5th and 6th bars emphasize the tonic of the piece through the B-flat major scale, as well as the imitative punctuation of the B-flat major triad, F, D, and B-flat. Finally, the ascending scale in the 7th bar decelerates, and Ozzy changes the pattern at the top of the scale to descend to the cadential trill. Now, the most curious aspect of Ozzy's cadenzas is that he never includes a repetition or development of a theme from within the composition. He always writes new material in the cadenza. This makes Ozzy's cadenzas particularly handy for anyone who's actually wishing to have a short cadenza in a classical sonata or concerto performance, but are too lazy to write their own, as they can just copy-paste the cadenza from Ozzy's Caprice in the corresponding key. It's also worth emphasizing that, according to Mancini, it is not wrong to include a cadenza where one isn't expressly asked for. So as long as it is tastefully done. If you want to add a cadenza, go ahead and feel free to tweak the composition to accommodate for it. So here's an example from a video I did with Andreas Westermann on the forte piano and Nicola Paoli on the cello of the Mozart Bassoon and Cello duo. At the end of the first movement, I recomposed the bass in the last repetition of the final phrase and inserted the cadenza that we just looked at, as it is in the same key as that first movement of the Mozart duo. Let's have a listen. Now, in this video, I haven't touched upon a number of issues relating to cadenzas, which I hope to cover in future videos. The most important, I think, being that the fact that we now have so many recordings of the Mozart Bassoon Concerto, as well as numerous published cadenzas written by bassoonists of the 20th century for that concerto, that we are creating a sort of canon of our own. We are too often discussing cadenzas on a level which is far removed, not only from the matters I've brought up in this video, but also, and most importantly, I think, that we are not coming from a degree of experience in performing and watching others cadencing live on a regular basis. All of the 18th century treatises which do speak about cadenzas don't simply view them from the lens of a performer or an instructor, but also as a listener. In fact, all of the objective advice they give to the reader comes from either witnessing bad performances or judging the reactions to their own performance from their audience. Ultimately, it will be the reaction of your audience which will determine the success of a cadenza, and it will be up to you to move them in a way which complements their experience of the piece that you are performing. That's it for me today. If you liked this video, then please consider becoming a patron via Patreon, and don't forget to like this video via YouTube, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.